Welcome back to the Freelance Tea Break, the short and sweet podcast you can enjoy while you're making a cuppa. This week, I got an email through to confirm that I have completed my TQUK Level 2 certificate in Understanding Autism. And this is a certificate that I started taking about 12 weeks ago. Very much the motivation behind it was to make sure that I can understand autism as much as possible. I'm someone with ADHD, and I have a fairly good idea, lived experience, and also through all my research and reading about ADHD and all the impacts it has. So I felt like I was able to provide a good service to both my neurotypical and my ADHD clients, but I felt like there was a lot to learn about autism. So I took this certificate, which actually was, it's like a free one actually that you can get through, what's the name of the course? The Skills Network. They do a bunch of free courses that you can do, but they're really, really thorough courses actually. I was quite impressed. I'm not sponsored or anything. They just popped up on my Instagram, as an ad. And I was expecting it to be quite a basic course, but it's really thorough. And I think 3 or 4 modules, and it took about 12 weeks to complete. But it gave me such a better understanding of the challenges that people with autism face. And also a lot of clients that I have are ADHD or have ADHD and autism. And it's a really common one actually now to see people get diagnosed with ADHD, have some of their symptoms perhaps lessened by better support or medication, and then the symptoms of autism become a lot clearer. So then we see sort of a second tier of diagnosis. So it was really important to me that I could understand a lot more. And I learned so much about understanding sensory hypersensitivities, but also hyposensitivity. So I already knew about hypersensitivities in terms of being very sensitive to certain sensory inputs, like it could be something like spicy food or any kind of strong flavoured food, but it can also be louder music, it could be bright sounds, it could be itchy labels. So I think that's quite a commonly known one, but I didn't know about hyposensitivity, which is where people with these hyposensitivities seek out these sensory experiences or they don't feel them as strongly. So, for example, someone who is hyposensitive to strong flavours really loves like very spicy curries and things like that because they don't feel the sensation as strong. I'm probably not wording it particularly right, but it really opened my eyes because it made me realise in my own family that my son is perhaps hyposensitive to sound. He really likes lots of sound. And also in terms of pressure, he loves really strong hugs, but he also likes to push heavy things. And he needs a lot of kind of pressure. So things like weighted blankets work really well with him, and he's got some weighted toys and things like that. I, on the flip side, am quite hypersensitive to sound. So if there's a lot of noisy sound going on, I use my loop earplugs just to cope with it. And I do love firm hugs and I love the weighted blanket, but also I do get to a point where I can't have any of that on me. So it's not just for people with autism, but it made me understand so much more. And people can have a real mix. They can be hypersensitive to one thing and hyposensitive to another. So that was really interesting for me to just understand that a lot more, and also to build that more into what I do with my clients. But also there was a lot of learning there in terms of the challenges that people with autism might face on a day-to-day basis. Everything from routines, changes, navigating around, dealing with people in workspaces. There are so many different things that I hadn't even considered. And it was really good about putting you in that position. And there were lots of videos that made you realise how overwhelming all of that sensory input can be. So it made me think about what I can be doing better to support my coaching clients. And I want to share them with you because it might be useful for what you're doing, and to make what you're doing more accessible and inclusive. So here are some of the changes. I should also say I'm still learning. This was just a launch pad for me to learn more, but I'm constantly going to be learning more. I'm constantly reading up on this sort of thing, and I'm very open to suggestions. So if anything I share here is something that you want to share something to build upon it, or you want to come back and say, absolutely not, that's a really bad idea, please do, because I want to make sure that I'm doing the absolute best and giving the best service possible as a coach. And I can only do that by making sure that I'm really open to any feedback, to anything that's said back to me. So I'm very open to that. I won't be offended. So do feel free to drop me a message. Right. That was a big ramble. Let's jump into the things I'm going to be changing. So I'm going to be adding a section, and I think this is already in process actually. So I was chatting to Jo, who does a lot of the work behind the scenes, and we're actually going to do this in 2 different places. We're going to do this in the discovery call questionnaire, which is just sort of, I think it's only 4 or 5 questions, and in the main one, in the main questionnaire when people are properly onboarding and signing up. And I'm going to be asking in there, are there any accommodations that might be helpful or support that might be helpful? There is a question in there that people can share if they're neurodivergent. They don't have to. It's absolutely up to them. But sometimes it could be really helpful in terms of the tools that I would use to help someone with autism might be different to those with someone with ADHD. And equally, if someone has rejection sensitivity disorder, which is a really common one for ADHD, or PDA, which is about defying kind of authority type things, I would change how I'd be working with someone with that. And that's slightly more with autism as well. That one, for example, I would never ask someone if they're going to do something at the end of the session. I would perhaps challenge them, because then the ball is in their court and then it's less of a defiance thing. So there's things I'm learning that help around that. So I'm going to be adding in that section into the questionnaires. I'm going to give some examples as well, because sometimes it can be a bit overwhelming, especially if you're newly diagnosed or suspecting that you might have autism. But it can be everything from what would be useful in terms of the calls. What would you prefer to have? Cameras on, cameras off? Would you like it to be recorded? So I offer it to be recorded, transcribed, and to have a summary note for all of my calls. But some of my clients don't want to be recorded, and that is absolutely fine. We'll find another solution. And yeah, so that's the main things with the questionnaire. I'm going to be including more input in there so that people can say what they like support with. Second thing is making sure that the whole process is as clear and concise as possible. So from the language that I'm using to being able to be given time to process things, because actually for both ADHD and autism, processing time and emotional processing time can take longer. So allowing more time for that. And that is one of the reasons it's kind of confirms to me that I'm doing absolutely the right thing in discovery calls by never pressuring somebody on a discovery call as to whether they want to sign up. I pretty much end discovery calls by saying, what I can do is I can send you information, here are the details. I can check in with you if you would like, but I'm not going to pressure you, because I want someone to work with me because it's a hell yes, not because they feel pressured to or pushed on the spot. Number 3 is using more visual tools. So this is definitely something I learned about, that visual tools work really well. And I've found actually with a lot of my clients, actually, they really like using the whiteboard feature on Zoom. So whilst we're going along, we plan it out on a whiteboard, and having that visual element helps with the focus, but also it gives that visual slide that can be looked at later on or amended later on. So I'm finding that whiteboard feature works really well, but I'm also working on some workflows and things like that, some flow charts of how working with me works, so that people can see what step they're at, and hopefully that could be less overwhelming. I'm also realising actually that analogies work really well for my ADHD clients generally. Not always, but most love an analogy. My clients with autism don't necessarily always love an analogy. And sometimes they can struggle a little bit with things like with goal setting, imagining where they'll be in 3 months. So I'm tweaking that. I'm working on better ways to do that, so it's not overwhelming and it works better for their brains. Number 4 is planning ahead and avoiding any last minute changes. So this applies both to sessions and also in the goal setting. So I try not to cancel or reschedule any calls at the last minute, or I try and give some notice. And part of this is how I plan for the week. So I sit down on a Monday every week with Jo and go through the whole calendar and just double check there's no overlapping, and then I can sort it out if there is. But I really want to make sure that also in goal setting, we delve more into the different outcomes and how to prepare for them, so that someone leaves the session and feels like they have a really strong idea of what will happen, because we can't always control change. We can't always stop change from happening, but we can be prepared for doing it. And it's something that I've definitely experienced with my son in terms of just sometimes going through different scenarios and discussing how we might react to them rather than in the moment when fight or flight can kick in. So that's definitely something I'm doing a bit more with them. And so one other thing that seems to be really helping as well with that is the accountability sessions, because when clients take that up, it means that I'm checking in with them twice a week. And during those check-ins, we can delve into if anything hasn't gone to plan and what we can do to pivot. I can't say pivot without thinking of that friend scene with the sofa, but how we can pivot so that they feel more comfortable and they feel safe and they're able to move forward with it. Number 5 is being flexible. So if a client is having a day where they're burnt out or they've experienced or are in the middle of experiencing a meltdown, we can reschedule. It's not a problem. If a client would rather stay off camera during a session, absolutely fine. I've had that before as well, where they don't feel comfortable or they want to have a session, but they want to do it from bed and they don't want to be on camera. Absolutely fine. And if they want to have a Voxer session rather than a Zoom call, we can sort that out. And I wouldn't encourage cancellations, because I often find clients will come to the session and say, I wasn't going to come because I wasn't feeling it, but now I feel much better for it. But equally, I'm not going to penalise someone for not feeling able to come to a session or take advantage of it. And I don't want them to show up just for the sake of it because they paid for it. I would rather reschedule for a better time. If it's someone who's doing it every single week, then that's something we have to address. But in general, I really think a little bit of flexibility goes a long way. And I don't find many clients take the mick with that at all. I think it then means everybody's a bit more flexible and understanding of each other. Number 6, the final one, is working on a resources list, signposting to useful tools and services that may further support my clients. Now, this is something actually I've just been chatting to Jo about again, and I think what we're going to do it is either as a blog post or a long page on my website with sections for different neurodiversities, divergence. So ADHD, autism, but also things like dyslexia, dyscalculia, and I can then signpost to websites that can be useful, tools that can be useful, things like Access to Work, which I did do a podcast on, I think, last year about that. Tech that is useful, so all these kind of things, so that I can then point people towards that particular resource, and they will obviously be freelance specific rather than just for everything. So I think I covered this a little bit at the start, but this is very much a learning curve. This is what I've kind of picked up from the course, and I think I'll end up going back through the course because it was great. But these are the kind of things that I'm going to be implementing in my business. I'm very open to hearing what else might be helpful, because coaching is something where you can sometimes feel a bit vulnerable, and I want people to feel safe as well. And everything obviously is confidential, and I try to create a safe space as possible. So the more that I can do, the better, hopefully, the service I can provide. So I'm going to put the details of that course in there. Again, I'm not sponsored. I just thought it was a really good course, and I think a lot of people would benefit from it, because even if you're neurotypical, I still think it's worth learning more, because then you can create a business that is more accessible and that does allow for accommodations for lots of different people. And it can be as simple as like just adding in extra reminders into your meetings if you have someone with ADHD who's might struggle with their memory. And with autism, it might be just asking them if there are any other accommodations that you can add in. It doesn't have to be huge, big steps. I know it can feel sometimes like quite an overwhelming task to make your business more accessible. So just do one little thing at a time, one tweak at a time. And I think over time, you'll find that makes a big difference. I'd love to know what you think about this, and if there's any other things that you think would be useful. Come join us in the Facebook group, the Freelance Lifestylers. And I'm just trying to think what else. Oh, I'm on Instagram and TikTok, Emma Cossey. My butt is being kicked on Instagram at the moment. I did so well on Reels recently, and then the algorithm has done something weird, but the same content is doing much better on TikTok. So I'm on both of those. And I'd love to see you on there. Have a wonderful freelance week.